Pain shot through Dongsu's skull like lightning. His eyes opened slowly and everything looked blurry. The taste of blood filled his mouth. Something heavy pressed against his chest. He tried to move, but his body felt broken. The smell hit him next. Burning metal and something worse. Something that made his nose burn and his eyes water. He blinked hard and tried to focus. Above him, twisted metal hung like broken teeth. Sparks fell from damaged wires. This was not the clean white ceiling of the ship's medical bay. Dongsu remembered now. The solar flare. The alarm screaming. The ship spinning out of control. Captain Lee shouting orders that nobody could follow because the controls were dead. Then the crash. He pushed the metal beam off his chest and sat up. His whole body hurt, but nothing felt broken. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. He wiped it away with his sleeve and looked around. The survey ship Eternal Dawn was destroyed. The hull had split open like a cracked egg. Equipment was scattered everywhere. Chairs hung upside down from the ceiling. The main computer screen flickered with error messages before going dark forever. "Hello?" Dongsu called out. His voice sounded strange in the broken ship. "Is anyone alive?" A groan came from somewhere to his left. Dongsu crawled over broken glass and twisted metal toward the sound. He found Hanul trapped under a fallen cabinet. Her leg was bent at a bad angle, but her eyes were open. "Dongsu," she whispered. "What happened?" "We crashed," he said. He lifted the cabinet off her leg. She cried out in pain but tried to sit up. "Can you move?" Hanul tested her leg carefully. "It hurts, but I think it's just bruised." "Where are we?" Dongsu looked through a hole in the ship's wall. Outside, the ground was black and cracked. Yellow gas rose from cracks in the rocks. In the distance, mountains glowed red against a dark sky. Lightning flashed in purple clouds. "Not anywhere good," he said. They heard another voice calling for help. Together they found Wu Jin pinned under the pilot's seat. His arm was clearly broken, hanging at a wrong angle. But he was awake and talking. "The emergency beacon," Wu Jin said as they helped him stand. "Did it activate?" Dongsu checked the control panel. Most of it was destroyed, but one small screen still worked. Red letters blinked. "Emergency beacon offline, atmospheric interference detected." "The signal can't get through," Dongsu said. "Something in the air is blocking it." Hanul limped to what was left of the ship's sensors. "The atmosphere here is mostly sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. That's poison gas. And look at these readings. The air pressure is wrong. The gravity is too heavy. This planet is trying to kill us." Wu Jin sat down hard, holding his broken arm. "How long do we have?" Dongsu checked their supplies. The life support system was failing. Cracks in the hull let the poisonous air leak in slowly. Their emergency air would last maybe 6 hours. Food and water for 4 days if they were careful. "Not long enough," he said. Outside, the wind howled. Yellow gas swirled around the crashed ship like angry spirits. The ground shook every few minutes. In the distance, one of the glowing mountains shot fire into the sky. "Volcanoes," Dongsu said. He was a geologist. He knew what those red glows meant. "We crashed in a volcanic field." "Active ones, and great," Hanul said. She was trying to fix their air filter with broken tools. "Poison air, earthquakes, and volcanoes." "Anything else?" As if the planet heard her, the sky flashed bright white. A wall of purple clouds was moving toward them. Lightning jumped between the clouds like angry snakes. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. "Storm coming," Wu Jin said. "A big one." Dongsu studied the broken landscape through their sensors. The crashed ship sat in a valley surrounded by volcanic peaks. The biggest mountain, at least 10 kilometers high, stood right in front of them. Its top glowed like a giant torch. "We need to get to high ground," he said. "The beacon might work if we can get above this thick air." "High ground?" Hanul laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Dongsu, look outside. Those are active volcanoes. The air is poison. We have broken bones and no climbing gear. So we should just sit here and die?" Dongsu asked. "No, but be realistic. How are we supposed to climb a volcano?" Dongsu was quiet for a moment. He looked at the readings from their geological scanner. The biggest mountain was called Mount Infernus on their star charts. 10 kilometers of loose rock, poisonous gas, and molten lava. No human had ever climbed anything like it. But Dongsu had spent his whole life studying rocks and mountains. He understood how they formed, how they broke, how they could be climbed. This mountain was bigger and more dangerous than anything on Earth, but the basic rules were the same. "The north face," he said finally. "The slope is gentler there, and these old lava flows created natural steps. If we can make it to the first thermal vent, we can follow the ridge line up. You're insane, Hanul said. Maybe, but staying here is certain death. Climbing gives us a chance. Wu Jin struggled to his feet. What kind of chance? Dongsu looked at the mountain again. Math ran through his head. Distance, slope, time, supplies. The numbers were not good. Maybe 1 in 100, he admitted. Those are terrible odds, Hanul said. Better than 0. The purple storm was getting closer. The wind was growing stronger. Their air filter made a grinding noise and then stopped working. Yellow gas began to seep into the ship faster. We need to decide now, Dongsu said. Stay here and die slowly or try for the mountain. Hanul looked at her engineering tools scattered around the broken ship. Wu Jin tested his broken arm and winced. Both of them were injured. Both of them were scared, but they were human. And humans had always done impossible things when their backs were against the wall. What do we need? Hanul asked. Dongsu smiled for the first time since the crash. Everything we can carry. The climb began at dawn, though dawn on this planet was nothing like Earth. The sky turned from black to dark red as the volcanoes cast their glow through the poisonous clouds. Dongsu led the way, carrying a pack made from ship's fabric. Hanul followed, her injured leg wrapped tight with medical tape. Wu Jin came last, his broken arm in a makeshift sling. They had worked all night to prepare. Hanul had built climbing tools from pieces of the ship. Metal pipes became walking sticks. Safety cables were made from electrical wire. She had even created breathing masks from the air filters, though they would not last long against the poison gas. The first part of the climb was the hardest. The ground near the ship was unstable. Black rocks crumbled under their feet. Yellow gas rose from cracks in the earth. Every step might be their last. Dongsu stopped often to check his geological scanner. The device was damaged but still worked enough to show him the safest path. He looked for solid rock, avoiding areas where the ground was too hot or too soft. This way, he said, pointing to a ridge of dark stone. That rock is older. It will hold our weight. They climbed for 3 hours before stopping to rest. Already they were higher than their crashed ship, but the mountain still rose impossibly high above them. Wu Jin was breathing hard. His face was pale and sweaty. How much further? He asked. Dongsu checked his scanner again. We're maybe 1% of the way up. 1%? Hanul shook her head. We'll never make it, but they kept climbing. Humans always kept climbing. The slope grew steeper. The air grew thinner and more poisonous. Their breathing masks began to fail, letting in small amounts of the deadly gas. Dongsu felt dizzy. His head pounded. But he knew the mountain now. He could read its moods in the way the rocks lay, in the color of the gas vents, in the sound the wind made through the stone. By midday, they reached the first thermal vent. Hot water bubbled up from deep in the mountain, creating a small cloud of steam. The water was too hot to touch, but the steam was clean. They took off their masks and breathed deeply for the first time since leaving the ship. It's like a natural air purifier, Hanul said. The heat is burning off the poison gas. They rested by the vent and ate some of their emergency food. It tasted like cardboard, but it gave them strength. Wu Jin sat apart from the others, staring at his datapad. He had been quiet all morning. What are you looking at? Dongsu asked. Wu Jin showed him the screen. It was covered with numbers and symbols that made no sense. The ship's final sensor readings from right before we crashed. I've been trying to understand what happened. A solar flare killed our navigation, Hanul said. What else is there to understand? That's what I thought too. But look at this. Wu Jin pointed to a series of numbers. These are magnetic readings from inside the mountain. They don't make sense. Dongsu looked at the data. He was a geologist, not a pilot. But he knew what magnetic readings should look like near a volcano. These readings were all wrong. The magnetic field was too strong and too regular. Natural magnetic fields were random and chaotic. This looked almost like a pattern. Could be metal ore deposits, he said. Some volcanoes have a lot of iron in them. Maybe, Wu Jin said. But he didn't sound convinced. They started climbing again. The afternoon was worse than the morning. The slope became a steep wall of loose rocks. Every step sent stones tumbling down behind them. Hanul's climbing tools barely held in the crumbling stone. The gas was getting thicker, too. Even near the thermal vents, the air burned their throats and made their eyes water. Wu Jin was getting worse. He stopped every few minutes to cough up blood. Then the strange sound started. At first, Dongsu thought it was just the wind, a low humming noise that seemed to come from inside the mountain. But as they climbed higher, the sound grew stronger. It wasn't random like wind noise. It had a rhythm to it, like a giant heartbeat. "Do you hear that?" Hanyul asked. "The humming?" "Yes." Dongsu checked his scanner. The magnetic readings were getting stranger. The humming was stronger when the magnetic field was strongest. "It's coming from below us," Wu Jin said. He was breathing hard, but his eyes were bright with fever. Deep inside the mountain, they climbed until the red sun began to set. The slope here was less steep, following an old lava flow that had cooled into natural steps. Dongsu found a cave where they could spend the night. It was small and cold, but it protected them from the wind and gas. Wu Jin collapsed as soon as they stopped. His breathing was shallow and fast. The poison gas was killing him slowly. "I'm not going to make it," he whispered. "Don't talk like that," Hanyul said. But she was looking at her medical scanner. The readings were not good. Wu Jin grabbed Dongsu's arm. "The coordinates," he said. "In my datapad." "I figured out what they mean." He handed over the device. The screen showed a map of the mountain with a bright red dot marked deep inside the volcanic core. "What is it?" Dongsu asked. "I don't know. But it's big. And it's artificial." Wu Jin coughed up more blood. The magnetic readings, the humming sound. "Something is buried in this mountain. Something that doesn't belong here." "That's impossible," Hanyul said. "This planet has no intelligent life." "The survey said so." "The survey was wrong." Wu Jin's voice was getting weaker. "Or maybe whatever is down there is older than life on this planet. He died sometime during the night." Dongsu and Hanyul found him in the morning, still and cold. They buried him under loose rocks at the mouth of the cave. It wasn't much of a grave, but it was all they could do. "Should we go back?" Hanyul asked. She was crying, but trying to hide it. Dongsu looked up at the mountain. They were maybe halfway to the top now. The beacon might work from here, but probably not. They needed to go higher, but now there was something else. The coordinates in Wu Jin's datapad, the humming that grew stronger every hour, the impossible magnetic readings that suggested something artificial buried in the mountain's heart. "No," Dongsu said. "We keep climbing." "Why?" "Wu Jin is dead. I'm getting sick too. The odds are still terrible." "Because we're human," Dongsu said. "And humans don't give up when things get interesting." The humming grew louder as they prepared to leave the cave. Whatever was buried in Mount Infernus was calling to them. And despite everything, despite the poison air and the impossible climb and the death of their friend, Dongsu found himself eager to answer that call. It was a very human thing to do. The third day of climbing brought them into a different world. Above the poison clouds, the air was thinner but cleaner. Dongsu and Hanyul could breathe without their failing masks. The sky showed strange colors here, purple and green lights that danced like the aurora on Earth. But they were not alone. The first sign was the symbols carved into the rock face. Dongsu almost missed them at first. They looked like natural cracks in the stone. But when he looked closer, he saw the patterns, curved lines that formed complex shapes, symbols that clearly meant something even though he had no idea what. "Hanyul," he called. "Come look at this." She limped over to where he stood. Her leg was getting worse, but she refused to slow down. When she saw the carvings, her eyes went wide. "Those aren't natural," she said. "No, they're not." The symbols covered a large section of the cliff face. Some were shallow, worn by millions of years of wind and weather. Others were deep and sharp, as if they had been carved yesterday. The style was unlike anything in human history. The lines flowed like water, but formed geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "How old do you think they are?" Hanyul asked. Dongsu studied the rock around the carvings. "The wear patterns suggest millions of years. Maybe more. These symbols are older than human civilization. But that's impossible. The planetary survey said no intelligent life ever evolved here. The survey was wrong about a lot of things." They climbed past the symbol wall and found more surprises. Stone platforms cut into the mountainside, tunnels that led deep into the rock, though they were blocked by fallen stones. Everywhere they looked, they found signs of intelligence, of purpose, of something that had been here long before humans ever left Earth. The humming was much stronger now. It seemed to come from all around them, as if the mountain itself was singing. The sound made their bones vibrate. It made their teeth ache, but it also made them want to keep climbing. "It's getting louder," Hanyul said. She had to shout to be heard over the noise. Dongsu checked Wu Jin's datapad. The coordinates were still far below them, deep in the mountain's core. But his geological scanner was picking up more strange readings. The magnetic field here was so strong it was affecting their equipment. The scanner's display flickered and showed impossible readings. 2 kilometers down, he said. Whatever is making that sound is 2 kilometers straight down from here. Inside the magma chamber? It must be. Nothing else could survive down there. They found shelter that night in one of the ancient tunnels. Someone or something had carved it smooth. The walls showed more symbols and they glowed faintly in the dark. The glow was not from any light source Dongsu could identify. The symbols themselves seemed to produce the soft blue radiance. This is incredible, Hanul whispered. A lost civilization, right here on this dead planet. Maybe not so dead, Dongsu said. They tried to sleep, but the humming made it difficult. The sound seemed to get inside their heads. It gave them strange dreams. In the dreams, they walked through vast corridors filled with the glowing symbols. They saw massive machines that they somehow understood, even though the technology was completely alien. In the dreams, they heard voices. Not speaking any human language, but somehow they understood every word. The inheritors have come, the voices said. The testing begins. Both of them woke up at the same time, gasping and confused. Did you dream about the voices too? Hanul asked. Yes, how is that possible? I don't know. Maybe the humming is doing something to our brains. Hanul was getting sicker. The poison gas from lower on the mountain had damaged her lungs. She coughed constantly and moved more slowly every hour, but she refused to give up. With her engineer's knowledge, she began studying the glowing symbols. They're not just decorations, she said. Look at this pattern. It's like a circuit diagram. Or maybe a map, she was right. The more Dongsu looked at the symbols, the more they seemed to make sense. Not the individual marks, but the way they connected to each other, like a vast network spreading through the entire mountain. It's showing us something, he said. The whole mountain is covered with these symbols. They're all connected. Connected to what? To whatever is buried in the core. Hanul worked through the night using her engineering tools to map the symbol patterns. Despite her sickness, her mind was sharp. She began to understand the connections. The symbols were like a giant antenna, focused on the buried object 2 kilometers below. It's not just making the humming sound, she said. It's receiving it. The whole mountain is designed to channel some kind of signal. What kind of signal? I think it's a test. The symbols, the humming, even the climb itself. Someone built this as a challenge. Dongsu looked at her scanner readings. A challenge for who? For anyone brave enough or crazy enough to climb an active volcano to get here. The 4th day brought them to the mountain's upper reaches. The slope was gentler here, but the air was so thin they could barely breathe. Every step was an effort. Hanul collapsed twice, but each time she forced herself to get up and keep going. The humming was now so loud it was painful. Their ears bled from the sound pressure, but they also began to understand it better. It wasn't random noise, it was information. Complex patterns of sound that carried meaning. It's trying to communicate, Hanul said. The signal is getting stronger because we're getting closer to the source. Communicate what? I think it's testing us, seeing if we're worthy of something. Worthy of what? Hanul pointed to her scanner. It showed the coordinates from Wu Jin's data pad, now almost directly below them, of whatever is down there. That night they reached a plateau near the mountain's peak. The humming was so intense here that they could feel it in their bones. Their equipment was barely working. The magnetic field was stronger than anything ever recorded. But they could also feel something else, a presence, an intelligence watching them from deep in the mountain. It felt ancient and vast and patient. It had been waiting here for millions of years, waiting for someone to pass its test. We need to go down, Dongsu said. Into the mountain. Into an active volcano? That's suicide. Maybe. But staying up here won't tell us what's calling to us. Hanul was quiet for a long time. She looked at her failing equipment, at her own sick body, at the impossible task ahead of them. Any rational person would turn back now. Any sane species would call this mission a failure and go home. But they were human. And humans had never been entirely rational or sane. How do we get down there? She asked. Dongsu smiled. Very carefully. Hanul spent her last hours building the impossible. Using pieces from their emergency equipment and parts of the ship's hull they had carried up the mountain, she created something that might keep Dongsu alive during a descent into hell. Heat-resistant plating from the ship's exterior, she explained, her voice weak from sickness. Emergency cooling units to regulate temperature. and this oxygen recycler should give you about 30 minutes of breathable air. The device looked like a metal coffin with crude controls welded to the side. It was ugly and dangerous and probably wouldn't work. But it was the best they could do with broken equipment and no time. 30 minutes isn't very long, Dong-Su said. It's what we have. Hanyul coughed up blood and wiped it away. The lava flow patterns show a natural tube system about half a kilometer down. If you can ride the cooled lava flows down to that level, you might find a way into the caverns. Might? This is insane, Dong-Su. I'm an engineer, not a miracle worker. The odds of this working are practically zero. But not actually zero. No, not actually zero. They worked together to position the makeshift pod at the edge of a lava channel. The molten rock flowed slowly here, moving at maybe 10 kilometers per hour. If Dong-Su could get the pod into the flow at the right angle, it might carry him down into the mountain's core. It was the most dangerous plan either of them had ever heard. I should be the one going, Hanyul said. I understand the engineering better. You can barely stand. And someone needs to stay here to guide rescue teams if they ever come. Rescue teams won't come if you die down there. Then I won't die. Hanyul smiled sadly. Promise me something. If you find whatever is making that humming sound, don't just poke it with a stick. Try to be scientific about it. I promised to be as scientific as possible while falling into a volcano. They both knew she was dying. The poison gas in the thin air had damaged her lungs too badly. She would not live to see any rescue team, but she worked anyway, making final adjustments to the pod's controls. The cooling system will only work for about 20 minutes, she said. After that, you'll start to cook, and the magnetic interference down there will probably kill your communications, so I'll be flying blind into an active volcano with no way to call for help. That's about right. Sounds like a typical Tuesday for humans, Hanyul laughed. But it turned into another coughing fit. When it passed, she was weaker than before. I won't be here when you come back up. I know. Find out what's down there. Make this crazy climb worth something. Dong-Su climbed into the pod. The interior was cramped and hot despite the cooling system. Through the small window, he could see the lava flow glowing like liquid fire. The humming sound was so loud now that it shook the pod's metal walls. Ready? Hanyul asked. No. Do it anyway. She released the restraints. The pod slid down the rocky slope and splashed into the lava flow. Immediately, the temperature readings spiked. The cooling system whined as it tried to keep up with the incredible heat outside. The ride down was like nothing Dong-Su had ever experienced. The pod rolled and bounced as it rode the flowing lava. Through the window, he saw a world of fire and molten rock. The walls of the lava tube glowed cherry red. Occasionally, other tubes joined the main flow, creating waterfalls of liquid stone. The humming grew louder and more complex. It wasn't just one sound anymore, but many sounds layered together, like a symphony played by an alien orchestra. The meaning was still unclear, but Dong-Su began to sense patterns in the chaos. 20 minutes into the descent, the cooling system began to fail. The temperature inside the pod rose rapidly. Dong-Su's skin felt like it was burning. His breathing became short and painful, but he was close now. The coordinates from Wu Jin's datapad showed he was nearly at the right depth. Then the pod broke through into open space. Dong-Su found himself falling through a vast cavern inside the mountain. The pod tumbled end over end before crashing into a lake of cooled lava. The impact threw him against the metal walls. But the pod held together. When the spinning stopped, he looked out through the window and saw something impossible. The cavern was huge, easily a kilometer across, but it was not empty. In the center, rising from the lake of hardened lava, was a structure unlike anything human science had ever imagined. It was clearly a ship, but not built by any known technology. The hull was smooth and organic-looking, as if it had been grown rather than constructed. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that matched the humming sound. The ship was enormous, at least 2 kilometers long, and it was calling to him. Dong-Su forced open the pod's hatch. The air outside was hot but breathable. The cavern had its own atmosphere, somehow protected from the poisonous gases of the planet's surface. He climbed out of the ruined pod and stood on the shore of the lava lake. The humming was coming from the ship. Up close, it was not just sound but something deeper. A vibration that resonated in his bones, in his blood, in his DNA itself. It felt familiar, like a song he had heard before but couldn't quite remember. The ship's surface was covered with the same glowing symbols they had found on the mountain's walls, but these symbols were moving, flowing like liquid light across the alien hull. As Dongsu watched, new patterns appeared, symbols that seemed to be responding to his presence. A section of the hull opened silently. Beyond was a corridor filled with soft blue light. The humming grew softer, more welcoming. It was clearly an invitation. Dongsu had climbed an active volcano to get here. He had lost 2 friends and nearly died a dozen times. He had ridden a lava flow into the planet's core in a makeshift pod held together with hope and engineering wire. He was not going to stop now. The corridor was warm and dry. The walls pulsed with the same organic patterns as the ship's exterior. Symbols flowed past him like living text, always just beyond his ability to read. But somehow he understood their meaning. They were welcoming him home. Home. The word echoed in his mind as he walked deeper into the ship. This was not his home. He had never been here before, but something in his human DNA recognized this place, remembered it. The corridor led to a vast chamber at the ship's heart. Here the humming was softer but more complex. Computer screens covered the walls, but they showed symbols instead of numbers. In the center of the room stood a control console that looked like it had been designed for human hands. As Dongsu approached the console, it came to life. Screens lit up with information he somehow understood. Star maps showing the locations of distant worlds, technical diagrams of technologies beyond human comprehension, and most importantly, a message in symbols that his mind translated automatically. Welcome, inheritor. The test is complete. You have proven your worthiness. The legacy of the predecessors is now yours to claim. Dongsu stared at the message, his mind reeling. Test, inheritor. What was this ship and why did it seem to know him? More text appeared on the screens. The story it told was impossible, but the evidence surrounded him. This ship was ancient beyond imagination. It had been waiting here for millions of years, waiting for someone to pass its test, waiting for a human to climb an impossible mountain and descend into a volcano's heart, because only humans would be crazy enough to try. The ship's computers told Dongsu a story that changed everything he thought he knew about human history. Millions of years ago, this planet had been visited by humans. Not modern humans, but an earlier version of humanity that had reached the stars long before Earth's current civilizations. They were explorers from a time when humans were just beginning to spread across the galaxy. The ship's records called them the First Wave. Captain Byung-ho had commanded this vessel. With scientist Yoon-ji as his research leader, they had come here following signals left by an even older civilization, a species the records called the predecessors. The predecessors ruled the galaxy once, the ship's computer explained in symbols that Dongsu's mind somehow translated. But they vanished long ago. Before they left, they created tests. Challenges scattered across thousands of worlds. Images appeared on the screens. Ancient ruins on distant planets. Impossible puzzles buried in asteroid fields. Challenges that required specific traits to solve. Persistence, courage, the willingness to attempt the impossible. The tests were designed to find a worthy inheritor species. The computer continued. Most galactic civilizations are too cautious, too logical. They calculate the odds and turn away when the chances are poor. Dongsu thought about his own journey, climbing an active volcano, descending into molten lava. Any rational species would have called it suicide. But humans had always specialized in attempting the impossible. Humans were the first species to pass the tests, the computer said. Your ancestors proved that humanity possesses the essential qualities. You do not calculate odds when lives are at stake. You do not accept defeat when hope remains. You attempt the impossible because it is impossible. The screens showed more records. The first wave humans had found several predecessor sites across this sector of the galaxy. Each test was different, but all required the same traits. Stubborn refusal to give up. Curiosity stronger than fear. The willingness to risk everything for knowledge. But the tests were not complete, the computer continued. The predecessors required proof that these traits would persist across time. They designed this planet as a final verification. If humans ever returned here, if they still possessed the same essential nature, the inheritance would be activated. What inheritance? Dongsu asked aloud. The answer came in a flood of images and data. Star maps showing the locations of dozens of predecessor sites, technologies that could reshape matter at the atomic level, energy sources that tapped directly into the fabric of space itself. medical techniques that could extend human life for thousands of years. The predecessors had left behind the keys to galactic civilization. All of it was waiting for humans to claim it. The activation requires genetic verification, the computer explained. The individual must possess human DNA and demonstrate the essential psychological profile. Someone who would climb a volcano to reach this chamber qualifies automatically. Dongsu touched the control console. Immediately, scanners swept over him. The ship's computers analyzed his genetic code, his brain patterns, his memories of the impossible climb. Everything checked out. He was human. He had proven himself worthy. The ship began to change around him. Systems that had been dormant for millions of years came online. The hull regenerated. Healing damage accumulated over geological ages. The engines, powered by principles human science didn't understand, began their startup sequence. Most importantly, the planet itself began to transform. Through the ship's sensors, Dongsu watched ancient machinery buried throughout the volcanic mountain come to life. The poisonous atmosphere was being processed and cleaned by molecular-level filters. The volcanic activity was being regulated by force fields that channeled the planet's internal heat into useful energy. Within hours, the dead world was becoming habitable. The terraforming systems have been waiting for activation, the computer explained. This planet will now serve as a base for human expansion into predecessor territory. The ship's AI spoke with a voice that sounded familiar. As Dongsu listened, he realized it was using the recorded personality patterns of the long-dead scientist Yunji. She had programmed herself into the ship's systems before dying, creating an artificial version of her consciousness to guide future inheritors. The hardest part is done, Yunji's AI said. You've proven that humans still possess the essential nature. Now we must prepare for what comes next. What comes next? Contact with the other test sites. Integration of predecessor technologies. The transformation of humanity into a truly galactic civilization. Dongsu felt overwhelmed. He was just a geologist who had survived a ship crash. How was he supposed to handle the responsibility of transforming human civilization? You won't be alone, the AI assured him. The ship contains detailed instructions, manufacturing systems to build the technologies, communication arrays to contact other human colonies. Everything you need to begin the inheritance process. Through the ship's sensors, Dongsu could see the surface of the planet. The poisonous yellow clouds were clearing. The volcanic eruptions were becoming controlled and regular. Green patches were already appearing as the terraforming systems worked. In orbit, he detected incoming signals. Rescue ships from the nearest human colony, finally able to penetrate the planet's atmosphere now that it was being cleaned. They'll find me, Dongsu said. They'll find much more than that, the AI replied. They'll find the future of human civilization. The ship rose from its lava lake prison. Ancient systems lifted it through the mountain's core and up toward the surface. The volcanic peak opened like a flower, revealing concealed chambers that had been hidden for millions of years. When the rescue ships arrived, they found Dongsu waiting for them in a vessel beyond their understanding. He tried to explain what had happened, but the story was too incredible. A lost human colony from the distant past, an alien test that humanity had unknowingly passed, technologies that would revolutionize everything. The rescue team thought he was suffering from delirium, caused by exposure to the planet's toxic environment. Until their scanners confirmed that the ship was real, that the terraforming was actually happening, that the technologies were functional. Then they understood that everything had changed. Dongsu became the first guardian of the predecessor legacy. The ship's vast databases were carefully studied and translated. The terraforming techniques were applied to other worlds. The advanced technologies were gradually integrated into human civilization. But the most important discovery was the confirmation of something humans had always suspected about themselves. They were different from other species. Not stronger or smarter necessarily, but possessed of a unique psychological profile that made them perfect inheritors of galactic civilization. Other species looked at impossible odds and made rational decisions to avoid risk. Humans looked at impossible odds and asked how they could beat them. Other species calculated the costs of attempting dangerous ventures. Humans calculated the cost of not attempting them. Other species valued survival above all else. Humans valued survival, but they valued discovery and achievement even more. The predecessors had searched the galaxy for millions of years, looking for a species with these traits. They had found only one candidate: humanity. As Dongsu stood on the bridge of the ancient ship, watching human colonies spread across the transformed planet, he thought about Han Yule and Wu Jin. They had died climbing an impossible mountain for impossible reasons, but their deaths had not been meaningless. They had died proving that humans would never stop climbing impossible mountains. They had died proving that humanity was ready to inherit the galaxy. It was the most human thing they could have done, and it was exactly what the predecessors had been waiting for. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not because they had conquered it, but because they had proven they deserved it, by being willing to climb volcanoes for no better reason than to see what was on the other side, by being stubbornly, irrationally, magnificently human,